Okay. And so we begin. I guess maybe I should put my headphones on, huh? Oh, well, maybe not. You'll be able to hear me. There we are. Hello, people, as you start to join in. For those who don't know me already, I'm Dee, General Manager at Seelbach, and welcome to our first live of 2023. I am excited. We're going to be talking to Bill McBrayer. You're going to correct me and tell me how to say your last name. But we're going to be talking to Bill McBrayer of Old McBrayer Distillery. So he is already in here. So I'm going to dive right in. For everyone who is not already familiar with how we do our lives, feel free, as we are going through the conversation, to submit any questions you have. I'll ask them live, and we'll take it from there. Should be coming in any second. Hello, everyone who is
Hi, Dee.
joining us. There
How
we
are you
go.
doing?
Hello.
Good. Thanks for having me
I'm
today.
good. How are you?
Yes. How
Can you
about
hear
me?
me pretty
Very
well?
good. Okay.
Okay. Perfect. Yep. Let me turn my volume all the way up. Yep. There we go. Okay. Well, thanks
Thanks.
for joining, Bill.
Really happy to be here and looking forward to our time together.
Oh, I love all the good branding happening.
There's a
Okay.
lot there.
Perfect.
So there's a lot of brand. We can talk all about it.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot I like it. There's a lot to see. I love a good background. Okay. So while we're doing this live, everybody, I'm going to be trying out
It's
Old McBrayer. Is it
McBrayer.
McBrayer or McBrayer? McBrayer. Okay. So I'm going to make sure I'm saying it right. I'm going to be trying their bottled and bond bourbon while we're having this combo. So, ooh, already a ton of cinnamon. Anyway, so like I said, thanks for joining us. So I was doing a lot of bit of reading, because going through the timeline of the McBrayer story is like,
There's a
there's
lot
a
of
lot of
history
twists
there.
and turns in the story, actually. So, but I wanted to kind of get that breakdown from you. So, in terms of the lineage, where are you
Great
from
question. I get that
W.H.
question a
McBrayer?
lot. So I'm a ninth generation McBrayer here in the United States. Um, there were three brothers that came over in 1736 or so. Three brothers. I'm from the brother William. The judge and William Harris McBrayer is from the brother James. So he was a third generation. I'm a ninth generation. So he's my cousin, right? And
Okay. Okay, so
he
he's
is
your
my cousin.
cousin in the grand scheme of things. Okay.
Distant cousin.
Interesting. Okay, so clearly. And so how exactly, okay, well, let's kind of start from the beginning, and then my
Yes.
questions will probably get answered in the midst of this. So this started way back in the
Yes.
1800s, this
1840,
brand, correct? And no,
1844.
go ahead, what you say? Yes, okay. And so before that, there was another family business as what?
Oh,
There was a
yeah.
reference to
So,
cattle, there's a
yeah.
reference to a store, but it doesn't say what y'all
So
sold.
the McBrayers were actually, they fought in the Revolutionary War. One of the sons of James, the original Generation 1, he was a surveyor. And he actually came over in the James Baird settlement in Kentucky, the first settlement, and actually was a surveyor of the land. Some say he was a surveyor before Daniel Boone, and went back and got his family and brought them to what is now Lawrenceburg, Kentucky. They were granted a couple thousand acres for their service in the Revolutionary War. That was the West back then. And as you know, the youngest brother was James, or I'm sorry, Andrew. He was second generation, and William Harrison. He was one of his sons, one of 11 children. When he was first about 18, 19 years old, he got into the family business. They were a merchant store, and his sister Mary, who was maybe 10 years older, her husband at the time was a merchant, and then when he passed away, William and his brothers took over the merchant store in what is now Lawrenceburg. So he was first a merchant.
Okay.
And there was two places in Lawrenceburg to buy
So,
things at the time, right? They were one of them. Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah,
Yeah.
which would make sense given the time frame. Okay, this it didn't say what type of source. I was like, what were they selling that then
Right.
transitioned into them getting into whiskey? Okay, and so between that time, when did whiskey production even start? Like, how did they even? Where did they get started in order to get the reputation at that time of making like
Yeah.
some of the best whiskey in the country and
Well,
the
most
world,
likely the McBrayers
so on and so
had some
forth.
kind of still on their family farm, even when they. But
On their like
William Harrison,
property. Okay.
he bought his first his piece of land in 1844 there in Lawrenceburg, and he had just a small hut that had his distillery in it, and he started very small, and it wasn't until later in his career, maybe into the 1850s, he started to spend more time in it as he was growing as a politician in the area and some different things. He was very
Mhm. Yeah, the
yeah,
judge and
and
then Senate
yeah. So
and all the
he
things. Okay.
was
He's a
elected
big
the
man.
first when Kentucky became a state in 1851, I believe it was. He became the first judge in Anderson County, and that name, the judge, followed him for the rest of his life, and so he was known as the judge. And later on, he was elected to the state senate, and he probably, and he was making whiskey along, through that time. He started to really focus on that later in the 50s, and by 1873 is when he really started his reputation. He expanded the distillery in the late 1860s, and then he won the gold medal in Vienna, Austria in 1873 for the best whiskey in the world at the World Trade Fair. They said it turned the heads of the aristocrats in Europe from Scotch to Kentucky bourbon, and really put Kentucky bourbon on the international map. And so then he later won again in 1876, and his reputation really started to spread from there in the 1870s. But before that, I mean, he
Okay.
was a merchant, he was a judge, he's a cattle farmer, he was a merchant his whole life.
He's lived a
He
lot of
did. He
lives
did.
in his life as a many of different things. Oh, but someone said no volume. Let me double check and make sure our volume is. If anyone else can't hear us, can you let me know? If anyone can hear us, can you comment a thumbs up?
But before that,
Okay, I have volume on my end because I always monitor it from a separate page. So we should be good. That might be your connection, Susie. So double check that. But if anyone else can't hear, just let us know so I can try to adjust. Oh, thank you, Alex. Okay, so volume should be good. Okay, so
yeah,
perfect. She's got it. Wonderful. Okay, and
he
so
had.
yes, he's lived 20,000
And
lives.
his second
Apparently.
cousin was John H. McBrayer, J.H. McBrayer. He started his distillery in Lawrenceburg as well at the Hammonds Creek in 1847. So as Kentucky whiskey started to build a reputation, the McBrayers were known as making some of the finest whiskey in the area, right? And Anderson County was kind of the heart of bourbon, when it.
Yeah, because Lawrenceburg, now I've only been to Kentucky once, so I don't quite know where all of our major kind of whiskey production areas are in terms of proximity to each other. So we've got Bardstown, we've got Louisville,
Yeah,
we've got
Lawrenceburg,
Lawrenceburg is
that
the other
area,
one.
you have Wild Turkey there, and you have Four Roses there still today. But there was
Okay.
in downtown Lawrenceburg, there was like Whiskey Row of all the famous distillers, down there with T.B. Rippey and Bond and Lillard and Mary Dowling and W.B. Saffel and all those folks were kind of descendants of McBrayer. Helped a lot of them, most of them get started.
Yeah, just a few of those that you just said off the top of your head, I saw referenced in kind of the story too of how he bestowed some land to some and brought the nephew and
Yeah,
adopted son into other
talk about
pieces and helped an employee start his own
W.
distillery. That was the
Saffel,
WB.
yeah,
Was
which
it
is a brand
Spaffel? Saffel?
today still.
Okay.
And so it was about 10 years ago, I actually learned the story of the McBrayers in the bourbon business. Uh, so, uh,
Oh,
when I was a kid
okay.
growing up in the 70s, right? I mean, my dad, he was a sales guy at the time. And Old McBrayer was still a brand made in the late 70s, early 80s. It was actually bottled. Yeah, it was actually bottled
It was.
in
Okay.
Cincinnati, Ohio at the National Distillers plant in Cincinnati.
Was it
No, it
still
was owned by
within the
National
family at that time?
Distillers. The family got out of the
Okay.
business actually in the late 1800s, right? So, and we can kind of go through some of that history. And so, you know, when I was a kid growing up, all I knew was, you know, Dad would give his customers a bottle of Old McBrayer at Christmas time, right? And he said next time he saw them, they'd give it back to him. They said, "Man, this is terrible." It was bottom shelf. It was. I've seen some of those bottles from back then, and they have, you know, 70% blended, you know, neutral grain spirits in them. It was just not very good. And so I just thought McBrayer was, yeah, I just thought
That's
it was a
blasphemous.
rock gut nasty brand of whiskey. I didn't know. You know? And so, so it was about 10 years ago or so. I have a daughter, and she was thinking about going to a small college, and somebody told me to check out Center College down in Danville, Kentucky. And I was telling again my dad about it, and he said, "Well, you know, the McBrayers gave some money to that college." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he said it was McBrayer in the whiskey business. So I go home that weekend. I'm by myself. I think my family was out, and I'm looking for the McBrayer scholarship at Center College, because if there is one, she's going to apply there, and we're going to check it out. Didn't really, there wasn't a scholarship. I'm like, so I Googled McBrayer whiskey. I just happened to Google, and I ran across this blog post by Jack Sullivan on prepro.com. He has a wonderful site about pre-prohibition whiskey, and he had an article about William Harrison McBrayer, and he called him the judge of great whiskey. And I read this story and read how he had won the gold medal in 1876 in Philadelphia at the Centennial Expedition.
And won a
Vienna,
competition
Austria in
in
1873,
Vienna,
won some other ones later. And there was family lawsuits, and there was this brand called Cedarbrooke, and it was known as the most famous brand in the world by William Harrison McBrayer. And I was like, what? And I just got obsessed with this story. Probably didn't work for 6 weeks.
No one in your family was like kind of carrying along the story to you guys in terms of like the history of that?
Oh,
you said you didn't know? Yeah. And are you born and raised in Kentucky also?
I live in Cincinnati right now, and I've grown up in Ohio.
You live in Cincinnati. Okay.
And and you know, I just got obsessed with the story, and we actually are very blessed as a family. We have family historians that have done our genealogy. They've studied it for over 100 years. We have huge books, and so I'm getting the books. I'm talking to, you know, these historians, and then I think I'm on page, you know, 250 or something on Google, you know, and there's all this old research that I had found. So I traced the brands, you know, and I'm looking through the trademarks. And when National Distillers sold to Jim Beam, they had let the McBrayer trademarks expire. And so the trademarks had expired. So I re-registered the trademarks. And I was sitting at home in my chair one day after work, and my wife walks in the door, and I'm having a drink, you know, and I looked at my wife and said, "Honey, I'm going to get in the bourbon business." And she goes, "Really?" And I'm a pretty entrepreneurial guy. And I said, "I don't know anything about it, so I'm just going to start drinking it. I'm going to figure it out." And so that's how I got the bourbon. Yeah. So
that's one way to start. Okay, cool. Okay. So then this might already kind of answer my question then. So we don't know what W.H. McBrayer recipe was at the time then, his master.
So as I was doing this research, there was an old blog site on Bourbon Enthusiast from 2005. So if you get back in 2005, right? So it was really messy. And on this message board, there was Michael Beach, Chuck Crowdery, and they were talking, and Michael Beach had this letter from his work at the Filson Society, the Historical Center for Bourbon in Louisville. And he had the E.H. Taylor files. And he had a letter from McBrayer to E.H. Taylor from actually, I have a copy of it here. And
E.H. Taylor acquired the McBrayer at one point, right?
And those are different.
And, yes, the old McBrayer.
And so on this letter, on the back of the letter, it had this mash bill. then E.H. Taylor was buying his whiskey. So and it's a real letter, and I have it, like I said, and it was an 88% corn mash bill. And so, and Chuck Crowdery and Michael Beach are talking about this, that somebody should remake this, do a low barrel entry proof. And so I'm like, I guess there's my business plan for my first barrel of whiskey. And so, I had 2 kids, they were teenagers. I have another business. I'm in the loading dock and door business. That's my regular day job. And I said, hey, hurry up and retire, Dad. We're going to figure out how to make whiskey. We're going to resurrect these brands. So we took.
It's probably a fun thing for a dad to hear from his son.
So I took this letter. I took it to a distillery in Kentucky. Said, hey, can you guys make whiskey like this? They said, sure, we can do that. And we said, hey, we want to use an heirloom grain of corn, and we want to use an old yeast strand and some things. So they were very nice, and they helped us, right? And I said, is it going to taste any good? And they said, well, sure, it tastes. I said, well, how do you guys know? These guys are pretty good. I'm not allowed to say who they are anymore. But anyway,
okay.
And I said, hey,
well,
just so I know, can you make me 1 barrel? And they said, no, we can't make you 1. So they made me 10 barrels, right? And that was a run. And that was my first run 6 years ago of barrels. And that is different than the old McBrayer product. So that is what's now as our W.H. McBrayer product. And that was to honor the judge and to kind of reintroduce him into the bourbon community. And that product, we will have our 3rd batch of that released in April. And so that was how I started in the bourbon business. And really wanted to wait for that to get to be 4 years old. So it took a while for us to get started. Our first release was 5 barrels. The next one we did with that was 6 barrels. But the old McBrayer story is its story all in itself, which is the bottle that you have today. And that one.
So that is the Bourbon.
So that bourbon is that is some source bourbon that I got that was made at Bardstown Bourbon Company. And that's
got it. Okay.
That's the 5-year-old bourbon.
I like it. Okay.
It's probably some of the first barrels that came out of Bardstown Bourbon, right? 5 years ago. They haven't been around that long. And so that distillery in itself had its own story. And so that distillery was started in was purchased by J.H. McBrayer, his cousin in Newmarket, Kentucky in 1870. And that was distillery number 17. Right? That was number 7. Okay. That was Howard Barnes and Company, distillery number 17. And he changed it to the old McBrayer distillery. Mm-hmm. And then William Harrison McBrayer later bought it. So he owned it for a little while. And W.H., the judge, he bought it. Mm-hmm. And then there was a company here in Cincinnati called W.W. Johnson Company. And they were a distributor of whiskey around the country. And they were buying that. And they ended up buying the old McBrayer distillery. And then they eventually ended up selling it to E.H. Taylor. And so E.H. Taylor actually owned the brand for a little while. And Old McBrayer was actually made in the early 1900s at what we know today as the Castle and Key Distillery in Frankfurt. Okay. And so at some point, whenever they were starting to consolidate it, at one point, the Old McBrayer Distillery in Newmarket had about 45,000 barrels aging at that time. So, it was a small brand. And, it was pretty awesome. There was a guy in Utah. He was a drywaller, and he found this bottle in the wall when he was redoing the drywall on a bank in Utah, and so that label's a pretty famous label. It's been in the movie Untouchables, the movie Deadwood, Corey. I just realized it was also in Far and Away with Tom Cruise.
You know what? I think I saw a post about that on your page.
So I was able to recreate that label, which I thought was pretty fun to do, and do it as a bottled and bond whiskey over at Bardstown, and we're really happy with how that has turned out. So, and that brand, like I said, it was a big brand during Prohibition. It was sold during Prohibition. So, like, this is a bottle here that was, during Prohibition, when it was owned by the American Medicinal Spirits Company. So that was a 17-year-old bourbon.
Wow. Wait, let me see the shape of that bottle. That's really cool. Oh yeah, I love vintagey kind of ornamental.
This was a friend of mine's bottle, and he opened it, and that's a 17-year-old whiskey. There was, and it's probably some of the best.
Oh, you're saying 17 years at that time.
It was some of the best whiskey I'd ever had, and so going from what I heard about from the 80s, right? That thinking it was bottom shelf stuff, to understanding it was some of the best whiskey around at the time. And so this was a bottle here of Old McBrayer when the W.W. Johnson Company had owned it. So, I mean, we've been finding all this history, and it's just been a lot of fun to really, bring back the brands for today's consumer, right? And really, the goal of the business was to reintroduce who William Harris McBrayer was to the bourbon community. And, I've met with some of the historians in Kentucky, and I mean, he was E.H. Taylor before E.H. Taylor, right? He was iconic. There are people that have called him the most famous distiller at the time, but that's a pretty bold statement. So I just say he's an iconic figures in Kentucky bourbon that needs to be retold, right? The whole purpose of me starting this business was to really reintroduce William Harris McBrayer to the bourbon community, and hopefully get him in the Bourbon Hall of Fame. And that is truly the only reason I started this business at the time. And
really?
And have fun, right? And it's been great. And I'm excited that Seelbach is going to, have some Old McBrayer on their website, and I hope that your fans will just, hopefully they like it, and that the McBrayers are going to be known for bringing back, good quality bourbon to the world.
Well, I can say that at least for the bottled and bond, it's definitely good quality bourbon. I mean, it's delicious. When you said Bardstown, it was kind of like, okay, duh. But no, this is really nice. It's not like I'm just drinking yet another thing out of Bardstown, though. It's definitely its own thing. It's yummy. And so the Old McBrayer bourbon, are there two separate brands then currently that exist, or is it just Old McBrayer right now? Is there also
we have three actually family brands that we've been able to really re-trademark, right? And so McBrayer, when he first started, it was known as the WH brand. So it was, so we brought him back. Like I said, this one is meant to honor him, to retell his story. We use his mash bill, try to do some things that honor him. But really, his most famous brand was known as Cedarbrook. And so,
okay. So you brought back Cedarbrook also. We haven't had a release
of Cedarbrook yet. So we have trademarked Cedarbrook. We are planning on doing a small release of a wheated bourbon under Cedarbrook label later this year. And so, this bottle is really what a lot of the vintage Cedarbrook looks like.
Oh, I love that bottle. Are you guys going to try to redo anything with that style
this
label?
This particular one, we've reused some of the label, right? And we've taken some pieces of the different labels that we had found on Cedarbrook. But what I love about this brand, I mean, right here on this bottle. So in 1899, first off, William Harrison, he passed away in 1886, I believe it was. Okay, and his son-in-law was D.L. Moore. who was actually a distiller, who married his daughter, had 3 kids, widowed, so he had 3 kids. He took over the distillery when they passed away, or when he passed away. And then there was a family lawsuit, which we can talk about. But anyways, he sold to the Whiskey Trust in 1899. In 1899. So the Whiskey Trust had owned the brand. And right here on the bottle, they sold it. It says the best known brand in the world was. And so that's a pretty bold statement. So I don't know if I'm ready to put that on a bottle yet, but we love the bottles, and that label is pretty well known to a lot of the historians there in Kentucky.
That's pretty. I agree with the executive whiskey steward. I was just actually about to ask. So the glass, the really gorgeous, like embossed glass that you showed me, that was in the green box. Are y'all gonna try to bring back any of that cool glass like that?
The first goal is really to just get the trademarks, get our name, figure out how to be in the bourbon business, what it means to put something in the bottle, hopefully make sure it tastes good, retell our story. And that was a business in itself, getting back in this business. So these are very standard, old looking bottles, this Gettysburg bottle. Maybe we might make our own forms and bring back that glass. I think it would be fantastic to do that. We just need to sell some more bourbon.
Yeah. Understandable. So what kind of you mentioned Cedar Brook's not out yet, so we know that's to be anticipated. And then so for the W.H. McBrayer, what can we anticipate next from that brand?
That brand, we usually do that in the spring. And so that one should release here at the end of April. And we have on our website was our Legacy Club. So we typically send it out to our Legacy Club first. Last April, on our second batch, we released 1,300 bottles of that, and that actually sold out through our Legacy Club in 3 hours. So we've been out for the last year, and so
a great problem to have.
That's the heirloom corn. That's the one that we went in the barrel at 105 proof. That's the one that is really unique to us, and so.
So, question then, with it going into the barrel at 105 proof, are you all? What's it coming out of the barrel?
We've been aging those pretty low in the rick house, and so I just pulled about 30 some samples, and they were all between 102 and 105, and so we.
Okay, would y'all dilute that further, or kind of keep it there, because that's a nice.
We've always the first 2 releases we've done at barrel strength, and so and that's what they did back in the old days. They were low, just took it out of the barrel and drank it. And that's what we're hoping to do there to honor the old traditions in Kentucky. Yeah,
nice. That was Seelbach. We like almost everything at barrel strength, so that's good news to me. Now, which one are you sipping right now?
It's only 2:30. It's only 2.
The bottle of Bourbon or something else? Yeah. See, I start tasting early in the morning just to get notes and do all the things. So at this point, time is literally a construct in my office. This is so yummy. For those who may be curious in terms of what the old McBrayer Bottle and Bond is giving on the palate, definitely cherry. That's what's been like sitting on my palate this whole time. Cacao, leather. I was kind of like jotting stuff down as we were going. I got tobacco. Are we allowed to know the rye content in this mash? Because I'm getting scared.
It is a 70, 18, 12. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I get a little nuttiness in
okay.
there. Maybe some nuts. From I think that barley a little bit. But we would like it. I mean, we really trying to at least zone in on a few mash bills, between the wheated one and this one. And then obviously we have our specialty mash bill for us. And as we grow over time, we'll do some things unique with us and our labels. I hope that will separate us from everybody else out in the market. Do what we can and to honor the traditions and legacy of the McBrayer brands.
Nice. So with the Legacy Club and with your spring release that will be coming under the W.H. McBrayer brand, how will that work? Does your Legacy Club essentially get first dibs on that entire release, and then what's left can kind of
Yes, that's what we've done.
How that goes?
We started out like,
I'm asking for myself in case that wasn't obvious.
You know, when we started, like I said, so we did 10 barrels the first year, and then I had to bottle some bourbon when it was 1 year old, 1 year, 1 day, and sold to some friends and family because I had to use my trademarks, and that trademark thing is a whole nother story. And
yeah, it does have to be considered in use.
So
all this, and yes.
When I first did this, I registered these trademarks. Got some attorney to help me register trademarks, and I registered Old McBrayer and I registered Seelbach, and I got a call back from the attorney, and they were both Seelbach. There was a wine called Seelbach. However, we were able to re-trademark that as W.H. McBrayer's Seelbach Bourbon, and we got.
Okay.
And Old McBrayer got contested, and I was like, "Well, by who?" And she said it was the Scotch Whiskey Association. I'm like, "Really?" That's what I said to you. And so I said, "Well, what's that all about?" They said, "Well, McBrayer is a Scottish name, and if you put McBrayer whiskey on a bottle, you might mislead the public that it's Scotch instead of."
Well, aren't you of Scottish descent? Don't you have a right to kind of use it? I mean, I don't get it.
So I said, "Well, tell them about it." And they said, "Well, Mr. McBrayer, you'll probably win, but it's probably going to cost you $25,000, $30,000 to defend the case." And they have a lot of money, these Scottish people do. I was like, "Okay."
Yeah.
Well, so we settled it that I had to call it a bourbon or made in USA, and that was fine. So we got the Old McBrayer trademark. And so then on all his bottles, he had W.H. McBrayer on his label, Seelbach. So he started out as W.H. McBrayer, so we trademarked W.H. McBrayer. And like I said, later I was able to get the Seelbach trademark. And so, so getting our intellectual property has been real important to us, and you know, hopefully maybe someday we can get these DSP numbers. You know, he was DSP number 44 in Lawrenceburg. That was the Seelbach distillery. The Old McBrayer at 17. I mean, those are historical DSP numbers in itself. And so, you know.
Yeah. And so how does that work with acquiring a DSP number? Like, does another distillery occupy that number?
They give them new numbers. They're like 5 or 6 digits at this point. And so, but if you have, if you are a descendant, and some of the folks have been able to get their DSP numbers from their family, we'll maybe go down that path someday and be able to do that. Now, I don't know how big a distillery I'd like to have, if any, but sure would be nice to get those numbers somehow.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Keeping it all in the family. I like that. So I definitely thought that this was going to be like the story of the judge, and all this was going to be like something that was just regularly talked about in your family. So that's kind of cool that you kind of had to stumble onto the information like on your own.
You know, like I said, I get a little obsessed sometimes when I get into something. It's a small problem. And when I learned the story, we're going to dinner, and I'm with, my kids were teenagers at the time, right? So we would go out after a ball game. We'd be sitting having a drink with the other families, and we'd start talking about bourbon. I'd tell a story. Did you know the McBrayers were in the bourbon business? And eventually it got to be like, "Hey, Dad, when we go out tonight, would you not talk about bourbon?" You know. And so my family was ready to have an intervention, you know, and they'd tell me to just be quiet. And I said, "No, I'm telling you." Right.
I believe you talking about it and not drinking it.
Probably one of the coolest things though is you know, back then it was just an idea. Hey, I'm going to get in the bourbon business. And I think what is really rewarding is that my family and my children who are now in their 20s, right, 2 wonderful kids, they have seen something go from an idea to a reality. And it's really cool, right? And if you just keep plugging away every day, you just keep plugging away every day, you just keep trying to improve every day, you'll get there, you know? And it's longer than maybe what I was expecting, but I didn't care, right? I mean, my goal is to have this the rest of my life, right? I want to retire and mess around with bourbon for the rest of my life. So when you have a business plan that's a 25-year business plan, it's okay, you know. And if you're not doing it to sell it or my goal is just not to lose money, right? I have a hobby. I try to golf once in a while, right? To get out and play golf. Well, golf, I'm not very good, and it costs a lot of money, right? It costs a lot of money. Wouldn't it be cool to have a hobby that you could at least maybe break even in? Or
make a profit, yeah, or at least break even. Yeah.
So that's really the goal, right? Is to have a purpose, right? Every day have a purpose. Get up, figure out how to make some bourbon, how to create great bourbon, you know, have some fun, and figure it out, you know. And the bourbon industry has gotten so crazy the last several years. It's a lot different. I mean, 10 years ago, if I had known what I know today, shit, I mortgaged the house. I would have gone all in, but it wasn't about that, right? It was just about retelling the story, getting your brands out there, having some fun, and that's all I want to do, right? And we're getting there, right? I think we got 1,000 barrels of bourbon aging now, so we're getting there, you know. And we're gonna get a lot more.
It's great.
And we're having a lot of fun.
I love that. So, have either of your kids taken an interest in kind of doing any of this with you yet?
My wife is we've been married almost 29 years now. She helps me with a lot of stuff in the business. My dad's my partner. He helps me all the time with it. He's a great partner, right? He's almost 76, I think, right? And that's his retirement gig. And my kids are in their early 20s. My daughter's 25, my son's 22. They're getting started in life, right? So, and this is just a hobby still. It's not ready to pay salaries, you know. And so maybe someday, right? I hope so. I mean, they have interest in it. They are whatever brand ambassadors. They help promote the brands and helps me write newsletters, and my team helps me with my website, and I just try to blend whiskey and make it taste good.
I mean, right now you're literally like resurrecting that kind of tradition of like making it a family business again. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
6 generations
I've
later.
Heard a couple of different distilleries say you don't build a distillery for the current generation. You're building it for the next generation, and I just hope to have it here in the McBrayer family again, and we'll figure it out along the way.
I love that. I think that's a good note to cheers on. Let me pour a little bit more of my
I think I
know
here myself.
I think that is really cool. Wait, someone sent a question. Okay. Full-time baseball fan said, where are the barrels being aged at currently?
Well, we have barrels at Bardstown Bourbon. We have some barrels over at Green River, and I have several hundred at a non-disclosed distillery that I can't talk about.
And are the ones we can't talk about, are those the ones under not under the old McBrayer?
And we did another real low barrel entry proof as well as an experiment, and how that turns out.
Okay, so as we start to close out, I actually have a couple little just general questions. What is like one major thing, as come from being someone who wasn't in the whiskey business as a trade beforehand, just deciding to kind of do this off the cuff, what's a major thing you've learned about this industry since you've gotten into it?
First off, what a great industry, right? First off, I love Kentucky, right? I had not spent a ton of time in Kentucky, and I've been down to Lawrenceburg. I've had the opportunity to speak at the Rippey House there in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky. Very welcoming of McBrayer. Had the opportunity to meet some of the, Jimmy Russell, who talked about McBrayer, and that whole Lawrenceburg community. And just everybody in the industry has been so welcoming, right? And so willing to help you and talk about things, and I've made a lot of friends, right? in the industry. There's a couple things we didn't get to, like we didn't talk about McBrayer adopting his nephew, right? His adopted nephew, right? Right. So
Yes, actually, I did read that because that was who had also
yeah.
started another distillery,
So
correct?
his sister Mary, who had been widowed and lost, and they took over the store. I think they were very close. She remarried a person by the name of Dr. Dixon Dedman in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky. They had a child, and he became an orphan at the age of 6, and he got adopted by his uncle, the judge.
Okay.
And
So that's how that came to be.
son,
Okay, I did
right?
read about
And
that.
his name was Charles Mortimer Dedman, C.M. Dedman. And for his wedding present, he gave him the money and land to start his distillery, and his brand was Kentucky Owl, right? And so we've all heard of Kentucky Owl today, and people have told me about this story about Kentucky Owl and said, "But your story sounds a lot like Kentucky Owl." I'm like, I don't know what Kentucky Owl is. I just want to do the McBrayer. Well,
Because it's
I realized,
literally all in the
they
family.
were related, and then I've had the opportunity to meet Dixon Dedman, and he's just a wonderful person to meet and to know, and he's been a great mentor to us. And he's a distant cousin of
Oh, I
some
love
sort,
that.
and so he's been a great person to meet and kind of connect with in this industry as well. He's given us a ton of advice on what to do every day, and then McBrayer also helped T.B. Rippey buy his first distillery in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky. That's now known as Wild Turkey today, right? And so,
Okay. So he's been a part of a lot of
yeah.
these
And then
legacy
one of his master distiller for 25 years was W.B. Saffel, which is a brand that's still owned today by Campari, Wild Turkey. And then, McBrayer, towards the end of his life in the 1880s, he was very instrumental in getting the railroad through Lawrenceburg, Kentucky. And so that became the McBrayer Crossing, and the railroad's there, and it became McBrayer, Kentucky at one point. So where Four Roses is today, that was actually in the old Prentice Distillery, which was McBrayer, Kentucky at the time. And so when you drive across the railroad tracks, you look to the left, there's a sign that says McBrayer still today. And so, and just connecting with those folks, Jimmy Russell, I met him for last year sometime, and I had my McBrayer shirt on, and he gave me a hard time. He's like, that McBrayer is down that way, and he was pointing towards what was known as McBrayer, Kentucky, and we laughed, and he pointed where the old Cedar Brook Distillery was at the time, and at the time in the late 1800s or so, it wasn't the biggest distillery in Anderson County. I think Rippey had the biggest one, but they said in some of the history books, it was by far the most famous distillery and things. So, but like I said, just meeting the people in the industry, it's just a fun industry, and everybody seems to be real helpful and willing to talk to you, and I just really love it.
That is one thing about bourbon in particular. I mean, I would say whiskey in particular, just because I've never had a bad experience bonding over whiskey with someone that I didn't necessarily know before. So that is one of my favorite things. I have a lot of favorite things about whiskey in general, and one of my favorite things is just the fact that it so easily and seamlessly brings like minds together in that way. So that is a really, really dope story. I cannot wait to get my hands on some of the secret juice from W.H. McBrayer. I'm very excited about that because this bottled and bond is delicious. I know there are two completely different recipes, so I'm just excited to, taste within that umbrella. So
we hope all three
brands
are unique to themselves, and they all will have a different probably price point at some point. And we want to find a way to allow all whiskey drinkers to have something that's very traditional, something that's maybe an old style, a legacy style, and then something maybe that's a little softer with the wheated bourbon, and we'll just see what goes from there.
I'm a wheated bourbon girl, so That is also music
Well,
to my ears. I love
what
malt
would you
and I
put
love
in a brand that is known as the most famous brand in the world? Like you have to do something that's right, older, right? I mean,
yeah.
you have some of the best brands. Some of those legacy brands are weeded bourbons out there. So,
Mhm.
so we'll see where that one goes.
Yeah. Well, I think you're
Thank you.
definitely on the right track. Definitely excited to see what you all continue to do. Excited to now be, working with you and
Absolutely.
selling the juice.
Oh,
So thank you for
thanks for
taking the
having me.
time to
And
meet with me. This was fun.
oh,
No reason to be nervous,
it's been a
right?
lot of fun. I hope.
Good, good. Well, in that case, everybody, thank you guys for tuning in and watching. The Ball and Bond will actually be going up for sale this week. I will specify on our actual page what day and time. But it should be very soon. I just don't want to misquote. So thank you all for tuning in and watching. Thank you for asking questions. And Bill, thank you
Thanks,
for
Steve.
answering all of them.
Appreciate
This
it.
was a great conversation. And I will talk to you all soon. Bye, guys.